This video is about taking breaks from keto, why you might want to do it, when it might be appropriate, and if you choose to do it, how to do it. So, with that being said, let's start with why you might want to take a break, why it is appropriate. During any diet, whether it be keto or any other, at a certain point, the fatigue that accumulates by restricting your calories eventually becomes too much to bear. Your sleep begins to suffer, your mood begins to suffer, you might even feel aches and pains in your joints. At the end of the day, dieting is a stressful thing on your body and on your psyche, and eventually it builds up. Keto, wonderfully, can be much better at keeping people feeling good even when they're in a deep calorie deficit. That doesn't mean that during keto, you're never going to experience these. You may well. And if that becomes the case, you may want to consider a diet break. So what does that actually look like, feeling this way and needing to take a break? Well, from my own perspective and many people that I've helped do the ketogenic diet, at a certain point, the cravings for non-keto foods become intense, to the extent that you tend to think about them constantly. And it can cause a degree of psychological strain if you're constantly ruminating on the foods that you're no longer allowed to eat. That can happen. Moreover, just like any other diet, if you do keto for long enough and you lose enough weight, eventually your body begins to take on a bit of wear and a bit of tear. If you're also doing a lot of exercise at the same time, this can expedite that process. After you've been doing the ketogenic diet for a while, you may start to find your sleep suffering, your joints hurting, your mood suffering, the ruminations of the foods that you wish to eat becoming increasingly overbearing. At this point, you may want to consider doing a diet break. Before I get into how to do a diet break, I want to put one recommendation first and foremost. Try not to take a break from the ketogenic diet if you've only been doing it for a few weeks. A month is a good starting point. Usually, many of the cravings that you're experiencing in the early portion of the diet will subside and only later come back with greater intensity. It is that second time that they return at which point you may want to consider a break, not the first. So with that being said, you've done the diet for a while and the previously mentioned symptoms are starting to add up and you want to consider taking a break. Here's how to do it. Taking a break on a ketogenic diet is much like any other diet. You're going to reincorporate foods that you were restricting. In the case of keto, that means carbohydrates. And you're going to eat a greater amount of food. If you weren't counting calories previously, then this process is a lot more simple. You're naturally going to eat more when you drop off of keto. And so the maintenance level of food that you will need to eat will probably be achieved without any intervention. If you were counting calories, then you're going to need to eat food at your maintenance level. Now, for those being serious about counting calories and monitoring their weight loss, you need to calculate a new maintenance calories. So if you have a maintenance calories that you had previously that you were eating, calculate a new set of maintenances using whatever calculator or method you previously used. Work with that maintenance because you will have lost weight. You're going to be eating in maintenance and you're going to be eating carbohydrates again. However, I do not recommend that you go full throttle into all of the things that you have been fantasizing about whilst on the ketogenic diet and whilst the cravings have been mounting. The thing about taking breaks on the ketogenic diet is you're going to be reincorporating a bunch of foods that you might previously have had problems with, foods that you're now craving heavily. It might be pretty easy to overeat when you drop off of keto, especially for the first time. These cravings are going to be quite intense. You're going to be eating at maintenance. Why are we going to be eating at maintenance? Well, simply put, we don't want to undo any of the progress that we've made by being on the diet. If we've lost a whole bunch of weight, you don't want to now gain back any weight. So, eat at maintenance to at the very least do no damage to your progress and simply delay it slightly. There are numerous carbohydrate sources that are perfectly amenable to a healthy and effective diet. These are whole foods. Things like potatoes, or at the very least, things like grains and unprocessed carbohydrates that are excessively palatable. Think whole potatoes that you cut and prepare yourself as opposed to chips. The difference is extremely meaningful, both in how much you will crave eating them and how much you will, as a consequence, naturally eat. To use a practical example, with someone that I previously helped through the ketogenic diet. At a certain point, after about a month and about 2 weeks, he was craving McDonald's intensely. And it was causing a degree of psychological strain. Eventually, I told him, you know what, it's fine. Take a break, reset yourself, calm your body down, calm your mind down. To ease the psychological strain that had accumulated on the diet, I said, you know what, take your break, enjoy that, but don't have it more than once. So, on your break, have that food that you've been craving. And then, for the rest of the period of your break, and we'll get to how long I recommend that should be, eat only whole food carbohydrates, or at the very least, try to limit processed foods as much as possible. Now, again, eating processed foods is generally not a good idea, not so much because they're inherently extremely unhealthy, but rather because they're extremely palatable. They're very easy to eat far more than you should, or otherwise would. Stay clear of too many processed foods, but do indulge in the thing that you were craving, but not excessively, if you can manage that. And a brief aside about managing cravings and binge eating. If you're someone who struggles with that, then taking diet breaks is probably not the best bet for you. Obviously, you know yourself far better than anyone else, and you know if you struggle with binging and if you struggle with overeating, and if that is the case, you may want to consider not approaching a diet break at all. But for everyone else who can manage these things relatively easily, then go ahead. So how long should you do a diet break for? My recommendation is as long as it takes to recover from the psychological and potential physical fatigue that has accumulated during the diet. How long will that be? Well, I don't know, but a good bet is a few days. 3, 4, maybe even a week. I've been speaking about psychological fatigue that accumulates on a diet, from restricting your access to certain foods and being in a deficit. And if you haven't ever been in a deep deficit for a long time, you might not realize how intense that psychological fatigue can be. But concurrent with that, building up as well, is a physical fatigue. Your body cannot recover as well when it is in a deficit, whether you're on keto or not. And especially if you're doing hard training like weightlifting, bodybuilding, etc., or even more intensely, strength training, then you will have accumulated a degree of physical strain on your body, which you may not be recovering from as well if you otherwise were not on the ketogenic diet and not in a deficit. So, this period of time that you're taking a break should be used to recover. And as soon as you feel recovered, straight back onto the diet. Try not go longer than a week, general recommendation. How will you know if you feel recovered? Well, if you feel motivated to continue your journey on the diet. And a way to keep yourself motivated, or to give you the best odds at being motivated, continuously think about the progress you have made and will continue to make. Think about your goals, keep them in mind, and think about the time scale you're working on. After a couple days of taking your break and eating whole foods, sticking away from processed foods, you start to feel a little better, your sleep may have recovered, your mind may have been put to ease, maybe you were dealing with a level of anxiety that you previously had not been dealing with, and that has abated. Those are all great signs. It's time to get back to the diet. Now, if you have not been over-consuming processed foods and highly palatable foods, the switch back to a more controlled diet that cuts out carbohydrates will be easier for you. And if you use the tools I've talked about to get into ketogenic diets quickly, then the process of getting back to it should only take you a few days. 1, 2, 3, maybe at a push 4. If you use the tools that I've previously talked about for getting into the ketogenic diet quickly, then you should take maybe 1, 2, at a push 3 or 4 days to get right back into it and continue making progress. Another quick point: if you decide you're going to take a break, the psychological fatigue is getting too much, don't take a break on that day. Instead, tell yourself, and commit to it, that you will be taking a break starting tomorrow. Sometimes you have a bad day, your mood's just not there, your mind isn't as strong as it otherwise would be, and you're prone to making rash decisions. What can really help is telling yourself, no, the break comes tomorrow, and potentially if this was a brief period of discomfort, it might pass by tomorrow, and then you might feel, I don't need a break anymore, and that's wonderful, continue making gains. So now we know when, how long, and a quick note about actually taking the diet. I want to talk briefly about diet breaks in general. There has been some reasonably robust evidence, most notably the Matador study, which suggested that individuals who take diet breaks frequently throughout the same diet course made similar and even sometimes greater diet losses. In weight, that is. All of that is to say that there is evidence to support the fact that diet breaks can actually help individuals both lose more weight on the diet as well as keep that weight off for longer. Now, there is evidence to suggest that these results are not maybe applicable to everyone and in all cases, but at the very least, if during your diet break you're eating in maintenance, you are doing no damage to your progress, and you are potentially setting yourself up for better weight loss in the future. I want to quickly note sickness and recovery from sickness. Previously, I mentioned that a diet break can be good to recover from the physical strain that your training or general life may have put upon you. When you're in a deficit, it is more difficult to recover in general, and that also means it can be difficult to recover from illnesses. I have personally found that when I get sick on keto, and I don't mean anything crazy, I just mean common colds and flus, that taking a break to help me recover from that sickness really helps and dramatically lowers the course of time in which I feel ill. So if you do find yourself getting sick, cold or flu, and it doesn't seem to be passing as quickly as it normally does, you might want to consider taking a break, eating more carbohydrates and eating more food up to maintenance, just to allow your body to recover quickly. Ultimately, that's taking a break. It's not much complexity. It's pretty simple. The study basically had, I think it was 51 obese men over a 16-week diet course, which is quite long, and a pretty steep calorie deficit. And the one group was eating the same amount of food, so a deficit, continuously throughout those 16 weeks, and the other group took intermittent diet breaks, where they would eat at maintenance. And they were quite frequent. They were far more frequent than I would have done as an intervention, but it was interesting nonetheless. So they were taking breaks like every 2 weeks, and they were breaking for like 2 weeks and eating at maintenance, and then going back into a deficit. Now, their deficit was a little more extreme in some cases, but overall, the group that was taking breaks lost more weight, and in the follow-up studies and the follow-up checkups, they had kept that weight off for longer. One of the biggest issues with dieting is that you rebound, typically. You finish your diet and you gain that weight right back. And so diet breaks are a way to help people learn how to eat at their new maintenance, because you're always recalculating your maintenance. So you get used to eating that 500 calories less to maintain your weight, and it doesn't build up as much fatigue. Because imagine dieting for 16 weeks hectically, and then you drop off, and now you can eat whatever you want again. Oh my goodness. The other group had been breaking every 2 weeks, recovering, feeling good, and learning how to eat after you get off of a diet. And so the final time when the diet ended permanently, they'd only been dieting for 2 weeks, whereas the other group had been dieting for 16 weeks, and they had many instances of practice with dealing with that switch. So there's great evidence to suggest that this might be useful. There's also a study on women who were losing weight, and they had diet breaks, and they didn't see any gains in weight loss. It wasn't better, to put it simply.
Okay. So
that's
for men it might be more effective.
Well, no, you can't make any like strong statements like that. That's it. Very much is. It may be, because
Sample size is big enough.
Well, there's many limitations. The Matador study, I think, was 50 people. It's not a very big sample size. Obviously, whom you're selecting as your participants, very meaningful. Yes, maybe something to do with being a woman, but also, how was it actually done? Like, was this in a lab? Did you only eat food under the supervision of individuals, of the lab technicians and whatnot? They can be very robust and control your food well. Are you giving more free rein to people? Are you just saying, you should take a diet break for 2 weeks and then go back on the diet? Because there's lots of studies, and you can't make strong apples-to-apples comparisons unless the studies are basically a replication of each other, or have all the same methodology and all the same implementation and all the same, at the very least, similar samples. So you can't make any strong statements, but it certainly is the case that there is some evidence to suggest that it's helpful, and some evidence to suggest that it's not helpful but not bad. So that's why I'm pretty confident just being like, yeah, diet breaks are fine. They probably aren't going to be bad, especially if you're eating at maintenance, because you can do no damage. You just prolong the time course. Here on this channel, I cover topics and interesting bits of information about the ketogenic diet, guides and information that helps me and others in my life do the diet. If you are interested in the diet as well, stick around. There's plenty to learn, lots to see. And if you have any considerations, questions, or further information, please leave it down below. We'll read it.